The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, 2009, original Swedish language version, movie review. So, just in case somebody is not familiar with it, this movie is based on a series of books that were originally published in Swedish and then translated into English and became bestsellers all over the world, I believe. There's a couple different versions of this movie. There was one made in 2009 in Sweden, in Swedish, which, according to the box on the video rental that I rented from, was the highest grossing Swedish film in history and the biggest moneymaker in Europe in 2009. Now, it was since remade in 2011 in English, starring Daniel Craig, with, typical Hollywood release. I've actually not seen that version yet. I don't know, maybe I will someday. But this is the 2009 Swedish version that I saw. Now, this is a kind of film that I wouldn't normally have any interest in. I wasn't particularly interested in the books, and, I haven't read them, so I don't know. Maybe if I did give them a chance, I'd turn out to really like them. But it's not the thing that I'm, would left to my own devices, it's not the kind of thing I'd be interested in. And if you watch this channel, you know that the type of books I normally like are either history or historical fiction or fantasy or science fiction, crime thrillers, which I believe is the genre that this book would be classified under, I'm not particularly interested in. And crime thriller movies, I can quite often take or leave. I mean, if they're on TV or somebody else wants to rent them, I can enjoy them. It's not the type of thing that I would usually seek out myself. So for this movie, it would not have been the type of thing that I would normally have sought out myself, except a friend recommended it to me. It happened during a conversation. We were talking about movies that really shock us or leave a strong impression on us. I was talking about Heavenly Creatures, which I saw when I was 18, which I haven't seen since, but really remember the impact that movie made on me. I don't want to say too much about that movie for a couple of reasons. One, I don't want to get sidetracked because the purpose of this video is not to review that movie. That would have to be a separate video in its own right. And two, it's one of those movies where the less said about it, the better. In that, well, the less said about it, the better. But I was giving this example of a movie which really made a very strong impression on me. It horrified me and yet stuck with me. It's not something I really remembered. And my friend cited this movie as her own equivalent, a movie which really shocked and horrified her, and yet made a very strong impression on her. And she recommended it to me in those terms. To a certain extent, I don't know why I'm even mentioning that, because this was not at all the effect that the film had on me. I found it entirely forgettable, but it was the effect it had on her, so, I guess two different opinions. You can see the movie and decide for yourself. I found it entirely forgettable. It was enjoyable for what it was. It was your average mystery suspense thriller movie, of which, in my opinion, there are a dime a dozen. I didn't find it particularly better than any of the other mystery, suspense thriller movies I've seen over the years. Again, not bad, but entirely forgettable. I'm left a little bit mystified as to what all the hype was. Again, this was the biggest moneymaker in Europe in 2009, the highest grossing Swedish film in history. Why? I don't know. Again, take my opinion with a grain of salt, because this is just one man's opinion. Maybe I'm missing something, although I did watch it with my brother-in-law, and he had the same reaction that I did. He said, if it hadn't been a foreign language subtitled film, I would have just considered it a bad movie. That's my brother's-in-law's opinion. And yes, I wonder the same thing. If this movie hadn't been released with all the hype and all the history behind the books that go with it, and if it hadn't been a foreign film, would people have even noticed it? Now, there are some sexual assault scenes in this film which have gotten people's attention. I think perhaps this is what my friend had been referring to when she said this movie really shocked her. Although she didn't actually specify which scenes, but I imagine it was these. They are very disturbing to watch. They didn't produce in me a kind of a chilling horror effect, which is what Heavenly Creatures did. To me, these scenes just produced a sense of revulsion. That plus, the plot was pretty far-fetched. And the fact that the plot was so far-fetched just kept me from getting immersed in the movie. It kept reminding me the whole time I was watching it that this was just some sort of far-fetched movie. That these were fictional characters and not real-life situations, and maybe that kept these scenes from having the same impact on me as they might have had if it had been in a more realistic movie. I don't know. However, I wouldn't go as far as to say the film bored me. It had my attention all the way through. The film starts off as a mildly intriguing murder mystery. I was watching to see what would develop. There were a couple different plot threads going on at once, and I was curious to see how they would come together. The girl with the dragon tattoo herself, the character from which the movie takes its name, seemed at the beginning of this movie to be just a minor character in her own movie, and yet you know that she's going to develop into something more significant because the movie is named after her. And that kind of sense of curiosity about how that character is going to develop is another thing that holds my interest as I was watching the movie. As they work to solve the crime, there are a couple surprises and a couple red herrings along the way, although that's pretty standard in this type of movie. You almost expect that there's going to be a few red herrings along the way. The bad guy, when he is ultimately confronted, turns out to be a pretty sick and twisted individual, although to a certain extent that's quite standard for these types of movies as well. I mean, if you've seen Silence of the Lambs or really any equivalent type of suspense movie, I'm not sure there's anything new here. I have, as I said at the beginning, to this day never seen the Daniel Craig version. I might see it someday, but if you have seen the Daniel Craig version, let me know in the comments what you think about that, because I'd be interested in hearing recommendations or comparisons between the Swedish version and the Daniel Craig version. I was not overly impressed with the Swedish version, although I didn't hate it either. Yeah, let me know what you thought.